I call the March 7th Finance Committee to order. Do I have a motion for a chair or nominee for chair? Councilmember Nutting?
Councilmember Mahoney.
Okay. Councilmember Mahoney, do you accept? Okay. Is there any other nominations? Okay, all in favor? Okay. Councilmember Mahoney, I will pass the meeting over to you.
Seeing none, all those in favor? Councilmember Nutting, be the vice chair. Vice chair, congratulations. So now we'll move on to biennial budget, and I turn it over to Mr. Friend.
Okay. In our first meeting, we discussed biennial budgeting and agreed to bring it up again in this meeting, giving it a month for consideration. So this time in discussing it, I just wanted to address why finance thinks it's a good idea, and also give a picture of what it would look like, which we didn't really get into in the first meeting as far as what the process looks like. So biennial budgeting, as we stated, Washington State allows cities to budget one of two ways, either on an annual basis, which tends to be the default, or on a biennial basis, with a biennial cycle, which is 2 years at a time. So you can do 1 year at a time, or by ordinance, by the council, you can do 2 years at a time. A lot of cities, in the packet we list a lot of cities that have biennial budgeting. Is not to say that, well, we should do it because they do it. But the point that we're trying to make is it's common. It's not some weird, unusual thing that we're recommending. But a lot of cities do it, and cities do annual budgeting. So we do annual budgeting, as well as the city of Cummington, city of Pacific, they do annual budgeting. So as far as what it would look like, if we were to do a budget for 2025 and 2026. So in 2024, we'd be working on that budget for both years at the same time. And in the fall, that budget would have to be passed by December 31st. And at the same time, in the fall, before December 31st, we would also be passing budget amendments for the 2024 budget. So for this year, what it would look like is we would be working on a biennial budget for the 25 and 26 and doing budget amendments for 2024. So when that would be complete and it's 2025, we would not be starting a budget process from scratch all over again. We would have those 2025 and 2026 numbers. We wouldn't be working on a 2026 budget, but what we would have by state law would be a review and modification period from September through December. So instead of having a whole entire, budget process again, we would have a period of time where council would pass an ordinance with any modifications that we would need. So maybe, we have a new revenue source, different projects, or, just different economic factors. At that time, we can modify the 2026 budget. And at the same time, we could also pass budget amendments for 2025, which we would normally do anyway. So in a way, it's, yes, you're budgeting for 2 years at a time, but the process isn't that much different, but the process is allowing the city to use resources more efficiently. So instead of having to do all that work year in and year out, directors can do a little bit more work the first year. So this year would be a bit of a heavier lift, but then next year, say the Public Works Department, they can have more time dedicated to their projects than they would if they had to do an entire budget. So that's where the efficiency is built in. So then if we came to the year of 2026, we would do 2026 budget amendments just like normal, and then we'd be working on the 27, 28 budget. And so the weakness is, as far as one of the disadvantages is it's 2024, and we need to forecast out what's going to happen in 2026. But that's why that whole review and modification period is built in. Also is built in because they don't want you to pass a 2-year budget and then walk away for 2 years. So you have to work on your budget still, but it's just the workload is just allocated in a more efficient way. So it's a way that taxpayers can get more for their money, and it doesn't cost the city anything to do that for the taxpayers. And then the last reason why we recommend biennial budgeting is it just puts an emphasis on long-term planning. So if we have a long-term vision to accomplish something, then we can at least, we want to do something in 28 and 29, we're looking at things 2 years at a time, and that's an easier way to bridge from now to that vision and accomplish it than if you're looking at a short-term, 1 year, at a time, focus, then you might not see what's coming down the road as easily. So that's, why finance is recommending biennial budgeting. It's a preference. It's not a right or wrong kind of issue. It's, does the city council prefer annual budgeting or biennial budgeting? And it's the first time, really, I think in a number of years where the council would have the opportunity to actually consider that question. So that's the
Questions? I got a couple.
Okay.
So one of the things that I've had residents contacted me about their concerns is the oversight. The appearance is every 2 years we'll have less, but in our conversations you talked about it'll actually be more. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the review modification period. So if we were to budget 25 and 26 this year, really when we get to 2026, which is really where the oversight concern would be, I would think, is because we've already laid numbers down, then we have more time to do forecasts. We have more time to work on those kind of analytics than trying to build something from scratch at the time while trying to do those things. And so, and plus having a finance committee now, I think we have a lot of oversight. Well, it would be more anyway. So it's just, there's less, the second year of the biennium, there's less scrambling to put something together, which gives you the opportunity to do better oversight.
The second question is, obviously there's a timeline for this because you're looking at a biennial budget that would be for 25 and 26. Right. So can you speak a little bit about what that timeline is and why we have to do certain things now for council to make that decision so you can affect October and forward?
Yeah, so state law requires a biennial budget to begin with an odd number year. And if you're going to make that switch, I mean, you have to do it by, I think it was June 30th. So that's why right now we actually have the opportunity to decide, well, if we're going to do a biennial budget, we can start with 2025 because that's an odd numbered year. And if, we meet the deadline, if council decides that's what they'd like to do, they can issue an ordinance in time, and then we're okay. We know what we're going to be budgeting for the next, if we're going to do an annual or biennial.
Questions? Councilmember Harris, go ahead.
I have a question and then a comment. Jeff, can you talk a bit about how, if at all, this affects the state auditing process?
Yeah, it has no effect on the state auditors.
So we'll still go through the same entrance and then audit and then exit process annually?
Yes.
Okay. So, okay, great. So here's my comment. I will support this contingently, whatever the word is, because, and I have to be the sort of the downer here. I've been watching the city council for a long time. We've had annual budgeting, and it hasn't gotten it done in terms of transparency or basically strategic planning. And so I believe that when something is not getting it done, you need to try something different, and my support is contingent on improving the financial reporting. I would like to free up the finance department's time to dramatically improve the reporting that the council and the public receive, and if that is what happens, it will be a huge win, but it's definitely a risk. But I would just say to anyone who had been looking at things over the past 15 years or so, annual, biennial, it made no difference as to the outcomes. And I would rather that we develop a robust IT program where one can press a button and get something like don't have a stroke or whatever, but like real-time numbers, or at least within a week or two. Because frankly, every business that I've ever been involved with has the ability to press a button and get numbers from, at the latest, yesterday. I'm not trying to, but I'd be happy if we could get within 30 days. And we're not there. And the decisions that we have to make every September and August and so on end up being pro forma, because there simply is not enough information to do anything except trust. And frankly, we have made amendments anytime we darn well liked, and perhaps going to a biennial system might create some kind of strategic discipline so that we are truly working on a longer time horizon. The shifts in policy that I have seen just in my tenure have been they've made me dizzy sometimes. So I'm looking at this as an opportunity, and yeah, it's a really good opportunity, but if it doesn't work, I will be the first to raise my hand and say so, and we will know within a couple of years. We will absolutely know if it's helpful or not. Thank you.
I want to respond to that. First of all, we have to be careful about what the purpose of this committee is, and we want to ensure we have our reserve. We want to make sure our staff can do their job and not do their job for them. As far as a system, we implemented a new system, and I'm not sure where you get stuff where you can get numbers yesterday. I work for Nordstrom. We just finished our year about 2 months ago, and we just released numbers here. Typically, and we don't have state payments and stuff that comes late. So the realism, you can get a general average, which we get on a quarterly basis, and it's usually the next quarter after you get that information. This is totally in the norm of what it is. So I don't even understand where you're coming with that. You're not gonna get a press and play. That's just not the reality of the way cities work or businesses work in all of my experience. So I disagree there. I think that as far as what we're trying to do with the biennial budget is the thing is we're not broke. We're just trying to ensure we make our reserve. We've had to face things that in a time right now where the reason why we are where we are is because we've basically got a three-legged stool in revenue. We've got property taxes, which are capped. We've got sales and use tax, which we're trying to figure out ways to grow business to increase that revenue. And third, we got utility taxes for the most part. There's some other ones, but those are the big three. And the fact is a lot of those don't have any growth in them. And then we've had to endure double-digit inflation. Prices might be leveling off, but they cost us a lot more. We saw interest rates increase, and we also saw labor costs and costs of goods go up. Yet our revenue, even though we protected it and we've done a fairly good job, especially during COVID, we have a dollar value. But it's this gap that every city's facing is really what we're here for, and that's the purpose of this committee right now. And that's what we need to focus on. And as far as trying to manage or micromanage at a detail level, that is just not our role. Our role is to get summaries and talk about policy and vision and stay out of the weeds. Let them do their job and in the time format that they can do. But trying to have an expectation or even allude that we're behind the times or something, I think we've made major headway, particularly with the new system, and we're progressing. So I just counter your opinion on that. Did you have anything to say? Okay.
I would never argue with the chair, but I respectfully disagree, and I feel strongly that you get to better ideas on growth potential and cost management by having better information than we currently get. And I guess I can, publish some comparatives with the information that is presented to other councils, and the public can decide for itself. But I think these are valid things to be discussed here, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
All right, so basically, what you're looking for is the committee to recommend that the biennial budget be put before the council at the next available agenda that we can get it on. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So do I have support of the committee for that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have us, so let's move forward with the biennial budget, having the discussion with council and making a decision from there.
So Chair, just so you all know, that'll be next Thursday.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, the levy lift, and let's, I'll turn the floor over to you, Mr. Friend.
Discussing our revenue is a good segue to this topic. I think when I think about this, I think about recently the city's financial issues were characterized as I think it was called the $2 million iceberg, which I don't think is fully accurate, because I think the budget deficit is an annual recurring issue, so it's not just one amount of money that's going to disrupt the city. It's an ongoing budgeting issue. So given that, that means that the city needs to either raise revenue or cut expenditures to balance the budget. And one of the items that had been informally brought up amongst various people has been a property tax levy lid lift. And so that's now on the agenda for the Finance Committee to take a look at. And in the packet, we have a big discussion about what a levy lid lift is. And as we mentioned, property tax, it's our number one revenue source. But it's also, a property tax levy can only be, according to law, increased 1% per year. And as the chair mentioned, our costs are growing at a greater rate than that. So I think from 21 to 22, it was like 6% and then 13% the year after that. So when your revenue is growing at 1% and your expenditures are growing, far outpacing that revenue growth, then you're going to have a shortfall. So one of the things that you are allowed to do with a property tax levy is to lift that lid of 1%. And that is done by putting a ballot measure on the ballot. And if a simple majority passes that measure, then you can raise the rate of your property tax as long as it's not above the statutory limit. For the city of Des Moines, the statutory limit would be about $1.84. That's what it was in the last property tax levy. So having said that, that's an opportunity that for the city to increase its revenue would be to increase property tax by lifting the lid. Now, there's different ways that you can do that. There's 4 different models, and there's 2 different characteristics. So you can do it either temporarily, so you can raise your property tax temporarily and have it expire, or you can do it permanently. And the other set of variables is you could raise that rate for 1 year and then have it increase by the 1% and then be temporary, or you can do it multiple years. So you can do a rate increase that first year, and then you can do have increases the following 5 years for a total of 6 years. So they call it a temporary single year and a permanent single year. The single year means that that's when you increase your rate, is that 1 year. Even though it lasts like 5 or 6 years, it actually is not referring to that, but to how many years you can raise your rate. The multiple, then there's a temporary multiple, which you raise it multiple years and it expires. And then there's the same thing where it's permanent. And so I think, so there's a lot of different ways you can go. From finance, in our experience with the budget and where it's at today, and given the city's history of having done one, I think it was in 2008, that was temporary. What you have when you do it temporarily is you go back to where you started. It's called a levy cliff. That levy expires and you're back to the beginning. And we just think that if the city's gonna do this, it should be permanent. We don't wanna have to be facing a budget crisis in like 5 years because we only passed a temporary levy. So that's one of the criterias that we felt strongly about. The second one, in talking with the chief, and the reason I talked to the police chief is because we're hoping that this would take the form of a public safety levy that would help fund police and everything related to public safety. His experience, he's had an experience with a levy lid lift that passed in Redmond and failed in Redmond. And his advice was that we would want to have it on the ballot in August because the levy wouldn't be competing. If there was a ballot measure, it wouldn't be competing with like the federal election and all the other levies that are going to be on the ballot. And also the advantage of August is we're working on the budget and we'll know in August if we're going to have that revenue or not. So if the voters pass it or not, we'll know that ahead of time. Otherwise, it would be in November, which is like pretty much at the end of the budget process. And so we would have passed a budget most likely by November. Or we'd have to do some late scrambling to just fix the budget, because we don't know about the revenue. So we took a look at the impact of different rates. And that's in the packet. We don't seem to have page numbers. Yeah. So, I mean, there's examples in the packet. So Normandy Park, they passed a multi-year permanent in 2021, which is, they had like 67% yes. Shoreline, November 22, passed a multi-year permanent, passed with 62.84%. And last year, Maple Valley passed a single-year permanent with 65%. And it was funny because when I opened up my voting pamphlet in November, I turned to that page. I was like, well, maybe that's a sign. But if you look at the second last page, it has revenue impact of increased rates. And we're using 2023's levy as a base. So like if our rate was like 90.262 cents per thousand of assessed value. If it had been $1.10, that would have been an increase of a little over $1.2 million. If it had been $1.40, it would have been a little over a $3 million increase. So that's kind of the range between that. And the impact to the property taxpayer is the schedule below that. So if somebody had $1 million house or property, and they would have paid to the city of Des Moines $903 of property tax. If the rate had been $1.30, they would have paid $1,300. So it would have been an increase on $1 million would have been about $397. So that's kind of in brief, property tax levy lid lift. We do have a recommendation, which would be a multi-year permanent levy lid lift. The first year, we'd raise the rate to $1.35 per thousand. And then subsequent years, it would be the lesser of inflation or 3%. So if inflation's like 7 or 8%, we don't want to raise property tax 7 to 8%, but we would cap it at 3. Or if inflation was at 1.5, then we'd be limited to just 1.5. So we're not going crazy over raising it more than inflation actually is. But we do show what a single year levy lid lift is permanent as compared to the multi-year in the the single year levy lid lift and a multi-year levy lid lift are both displayed in the recommendation. Just so you can see the difference in growth. So in 2027 with the multi-year, we would have, if we were basing it on 2023, it would be like 9.1 million. Single year levy lid lift would be a little bit, have $500,000 less. But I would remind everyone that it's not a science. It's not like you raise your rate and you're guaranteed to get a certain amount of money. because assessed value can change. So it can go up, it can go down. Since I've been here, I think I think it was from 22 to 23, it actually went up $1 billion. But then it can come down, if the real estate market cools, it can come down. So you're not guaranteeing yourself, well, we're going to raise it such and such amount of money, so we'll definitely get, this return. But you probably would get more if you, didn't raise it at all. So I just wanted to make that clear that it's more art than science. And that's all I have in that presentation, if anybody has questions.
I got a couple. So the first thing is obviously with this levy, that if we recommend to put it before the council, to put it on, so it's on the ballot for August.
Right.
What exactly, and now, when we passed the ARPA money, part of it was to fund some of the officers. I assume this is to maintain some of those officers and add positions, and what kind of equipment are we talking about? Because the public, the way I feel it is the public will be looking, because they'll be deciding,
Right.
right? They're gonna want to know what they get for the money. We discussed this when we met. Do you have any details on that at this point?
Not in terms of the number of positions. I did look at, Councilmember Harris had a request at just what would constitute an FTE dollar-wise. So on average, one police patrol officer, I think, was around, is it 213,000, 216, and then a detective would be around 221. So we would be looking at those positions. We did have one of the ARPA officers just leave for another city. So I'm not sure if we have to have that as an ARPA position or just a position or whatnot, but we would be looking at police positions. As far as equipment, the city has a challenge with the purchase of police cars. So in a police car now, with inflation and scarcity and having to upfit them, are about $100,000 a piece. So, and through the pandemic, there were certain strategies that were implemented that kind of made it difficult, put us in a difficult spot now to replace cars. And so I would think if we're looking at equipment, the first thing we're looking at is cars, because you're just lucky to get one. And then we need to make sure we can afford them because our police fleet has grown. So, so we're looking at police car replacements and officers. But the key thing is, I talked to our bond counsel because I, was looking at, what rate should we recommend, and her comment was, it's really not how much of an increase it is, it's what it's for. And so that's, we are taking it seriously, but we don't really know what kind of levy we're looking at yet, because, we're just in discussion phases. But that's something I'm working closely with the police chief on.
So if we were recommend this for council to recommend to the budget, we would have that information before it comes before the council. But to sum it up, you're saying it's probably about $350,000 an officer.
Yes.
When you count them, their wages, salaries, benefits, and a vehicle.
Yeah.
Plus additional vehicles.
Right.
So yeah, that's the only request I make is if we recommend it forward, we have that information because we want to be able to do it. I think crime's on the increase, we've seen it. I think state policy and the court system have failed in this regard, and some of the adjustments they've had, regardless of what their intent was, and what it's done is reduce the safety, and it's a requirement that we do. And it's going to require that we need to put it before our voters to decide if public safety is an important issue. And I suspect that by doing this, you've done the numbers long range, and it maintains our reserve through 2026 and beyond, as you can see it.
Yes, especially, particularly the multi-year.
The other one is, can you talk about, I'm going to go back to the timeline. So when council would have to decide that this would go on a ballot to make the August ballot. You've already talked about the fact that if we got the approval in the August, then it's for you to be able to plan the October budget for 25 and 26. Right. But talk about, I guess, up until August, what's the timeline there?
Until August? Well, the most important date would be May 3rd, which is the date we would have to file the ballot measure with King County. So that's why, especially since we have a finance committee meeting monthly, we need to talk about it today, essentially. There's other pieces that go along with a ballot measure. The city would have to, if council elected to put the ballot measure on the ballot, the city would have to put a pro committee and a con committee together to come up with the pros and cons to the measure. So there's that. So there's different little pieces that go into it.
The pro and con comments, obviously when one of us run election, we file and we have a certain window of time if we're in a primary to get the information in. I would suspect that would probably be on the same timeline.
I think so. I could verify that with the city clerk.
Okay. All right. But thank you for those
Can I
answers.
say something real quick? So as far as timing goes, we are, with approval from this committee, we'll be bringing this item to the full council next Thursday, just as an introduction to the full council. And then after that, we would anticipate bringing the ordinance to the council on March 28th for approval or for consideration. And I think, to your point, yes, there is some work we need to do to identify to the council what this money would be used for. It will be projections as we'll be kind of working through. I think what we're anticipating is that this will be strictly a public safety levy and not add in parks or other city services, but will be items related strictly to public safety, and it will be maintaining existing services as well as adding capacity. So
Yes.
the specific numbers are something that we'll be working on as we progress through March.
Okay, yeah, the best information, if it's gonna come before the council next week, is all I could ask, is that at least we get them as informed as we possibly can before we make the recommendation to send it to the voters.
So yeah, so having the introduction again to the council next week, and then we'll have 2 more weeks for the council to think about what was presented, and then we'll do another presentation on the 28th.
Comments, questions? Councilmember Harris.
Again, I have a question and a comment. This may sound picayune, but is there a filing fee for this kind of thing, or any kind of county thing for, them doing this great work for us, getting it on the ballot?
No, there's no filing fee. And then today, actually, we did hear from the county. The person we needed to talk to was on vacation, but they sent us a booklet. And so far, from what I can understand, is, we already pay election costs annually. So I believe that covers the cost that's related to
They
this.
throw this in? What a great county.
Yeah, well, I'm still going to verify that, though.
Okay, no, I really, okay, so my comment is, my support is highly contingent. I was here for one attempt, might be more than one, that got creamed, and then it came back the next year and passed. And it came down to that the first time you've all heard this before, but they tried to bundle together multiple things, specifically the Redondo substation and more police, and that lost. And then they took that out and they changed it to one sentence saying we are going to, restore police officer staffing levels, and that passed, and the chief at the time sold it hard, and the community sold it hard, and it was a good thing. I believe I would refer people to Ordinance 1375. At the time, I was surprised that our tax rate at that time was $1.60, and that was why we had more police. I think there's a lot to like in the Maple Valley proposal. My mind is open to change, but I like the language, and I like the single-year permanent, because I think it's, I think asking people to, bite the bullet in the first year is reasonable, but asking them to continue to have a higher percentage in subsequent years might be a bridge too far. I think just the revenue spread is not that great, and I think the optics will be more challenging to explain to people. I think you can sell that 1 year increase, and unless there were a more dramatic revenue spread, I would be more inclined to vote single year permanent, but that's just me, and that's all I got.
Jeff, if you could talk about the difference between a 1 year and a multi-year, and why you're recommending the multi-year.
Sure. And I'd say, I'd preface it with, I think as long as finance is more concerned if it's permanent. So if it's permanent and the council agrees with that, we're pretty happy. But single year, in the example that's in the packet, you would raise the first year's property tax rate to $1.35, and then you'd stop raising it. So at most, it can go 1% a year for the next 5 years, or for however long you want to do 1% or need to do 1%. So Councilmember Harris is right. You're raising it the first year, and then it's just going to grow like usual, but it's not going to expire. So it's there to stay. Multi-year, in the example, we have $1.35. So it's the same rate the first year. So the first year is going to be the same. But the subsequent years, we put in there 3% for 24, 3% for 2025, 2% for 2026, 1.5%. So it's growing over that limit, more quickly, and then ends up with like about $500,000 more. So I would say when I first started looking at this, the multi-year did make me nervous for actually the reasons that Councilmember Harris is stating, is that, especially if you took out that, linking it to inflation. Because I think as a voter, you'd be like, oh, you can hit me for 3% in year one and 5% in year two, and then 10%. So that's kind of scary. So that's why we did suggest capping it at the 3%. So I think either way is positive, but I think we prefer the multi-year when we're looking at the needs for the police fleet, when we're thinking about the growth of labor costs for the police. So with those continuing to grow, we think 3% for the first few years as a cap is reasonable.
Let me ask you a question. So with the multi-year, that pretty much probably assures us that we don't have to revisit this and come back, where if we do the single year, we most likely probably, if inflation continues or we have other issues,
Right.
we'd have to come back and reassess and possibly put something before the voters again? Or would it be a council approval
Well, I think,
combination?
yeah, well, I think it's kind of hard to say. You could say that could be true of both. Because if inflation is just so high and 3% isn't good enough, then maybe you have to do that again as well. But I think it's less likely with the multi-year than with the single year.
So, City Manager George, I want to ask you a question about this. So if we make a recommendation to put it before the council in the next couple meetings and so forth, do we have to make a recommendation if it's a single year or multi-year, or is that something that would be discussed at the council level? Or, I know
Are you
we
asking
could,
if the committee would make that recommendation? Or
yes, it's bringing it to 402 as per the recommendation that Mr. Friend had, versus giving them the choice to look at the two options and make that decision in those two meetings.
Yeah, well, ultimately, it's the council's decision. So I think, the committee could certainly make a recommendation. I don't think you're required to.
Okay.
And the council is not required to take the recommendation. But, at the committee level, the point of the committee, right, is to look into this stuff and discuss it and make knowledgeable recommendations. So it would make sense to me if this committee had a recommendation, but we also aren't going to have another committee meeting until likely after the council votes. And that vote, I believe the ordinance that the council would approve to pass this would state what type of levy lid lift it would be, so.
So I would say that we make a motion to bring this before council on a multi-year deal based on the recommendations of staff. Obviously, it can be discussed there and amended. Would you agree with that, Councilmember Nutting? He's already kind of stated his position.
Yeah, I would. It's not a motion, but yeah, my recommendation would be just to bring it in front of council and
Okay.
we discuss it and figure it out from there.
Councilman Harris?
I have two more bits of rhetorical business. First of all, talking about our population as a static object is simply not true. People move in and out of here basically every 5 to 7 years, and so I think it's reasonable to consider the hit to people on that 5-6 year timeline, and then go to the voters again if you want. It just seems like it's a bit too much, but you know, the main thing, I'm just thinking about it in terms of selling it. We have, I think it's the highest rate of seniors who are single. It might be second now. Single people who own homes, live alone, and are seniors. We just have this incredibly high rate. And so the other thing I like about the Maple Valley proposal, which the others don't do, they explicitly say qualifying seniors and veterans and others, I assume they mean low income, would be exempt. That is a wonderful sentence, and I strongly recommend its inclusion in the final language. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have an issue with that. I think it's something that the council can decide as a whole. But I think the initial recommendation for two of us is the multi-year. And I'm fine with discussing what we're gonna do, particularly with seniors and veterans. Mr. Harris can introduce that language when we take it before council.
Don't we already offer a qualifying discount on property taxes if you're a senior or low income or any? Do we offer that already?
I believe so, but I think the issue is the ability for them to qualify. I think that might be what Councilmember Harris might be.
You have to apply, it's somewhat, I'm sorry, I apologize, Chair.
No, Councilmember Harris, it's fine, go ahead.
Thank you. You have to apply, you get complaints about it being somewhat onerous. I'm mainly concerned, this for me is all about marketing. I think if you don't have that language, I'm not trying to put the cart before the horse, but if you don't have that language on the ballot, it will unnecessarily frighten people. People have to know, since we have such a large population that will be exempt, that you just have to remind them, okay, you know, you will be able to get some relief. It's just trying to get this to pass. This is a political, it's just getting the votes. Thank you.
And I'm fine with that, bringing up that discussion and more information and what it would require for anyone who would fit those criteria and the steps they'd go through. But I think in general, we are making the recommendation, you bring it before council next week's meeting, and then the subsequent meeting on I guess the 28th.
Yeah, and I'm reading this. I think there's a state statute that exempts specific people from property taxes, and so I think it's just a matter of preference on including that in the ballot measure, and so that's something that we can talk to our attorney that we're working with on this about including that language, because it would make sense to include it if it applies.
All right, we'll move on to the next order of business because we only have about 7 minutes. So you have the monthly general fund report?
Yes, and this is the report for January. Apologies if you expected narrative. I viewed it more as an informal just discussion. If you'd like some more narrative printed up with it, then I can do. I'm happy to.
How about just give us the highlights of what you feel is important, and we'll call that good, and then
Okay.
we can review further and ask questions at a later time to you.
Okay, well, I'd say, first of all, speaking of property tax, of course, what's always true of the first quarter is especially true of January, is that we don't really get much, so you can see there's only $27,000. The total operating income loss for the month was $235,000. But I'd also caution that as far as completeness, there are some entries that hadn't been posted yet in January. They're recurring entries, and we've built them into the system. So you'll see them in February. Overall, I think it's encouraging. One concern, though, is sales tax. Having seen the sales tax returns for January and February, we're not seeing growth. We're seeing it pretty much match the prior year within just a few $1,000s. So we're on target as far as what the last year's sales tax was, but we're not seeing a big increase yet. And of course, January and February are what we earned in November and December of last year.
Can you remind me, in the budget on sales tax, did you budget like a 2 or 3% increase based on the previous year's increase over the last year? Of course, we were coming out of COVID.
Yeah, I think we've got 4.325 budgeted, and I think that's a couple $100,000 more than the previous year.
So it's likely, based on what you've seen so far, we probably won't achieve that portion of the revenue.
It's still early. It's only, I mean, this is only January, and I've only seen January and February, but it seems like we're just flattening out for now.
Okay.
So,
And the final numbers for 2023, when can we expect those? Will we see those at the next finance committee and then before council, or would it be a month or so after that?
yeah, after that, where we're at right now is we're starting to work on the annual financial statements. So I wouldn't anticipate that they would be done before the next finance committee meeting, but maybe we should have them by the May meeting.
Okay, all right. Any other comments before? All right, do I have adjourn? Councilmember Harris, you okay with that too? All right. Meeting is adjourned.